building Christ-centered homes, certainly our first mission field is our home. Someone has once said, especially to preachers, that you don't neglect your family in your work as a preacher, and that goes for every husband and wife, parents not neglecting their families and the obligations that they have to them. But the reference is made to Noah. He preached for over 100 years, and he only saved his family. In Ephesians chapter 6, directly after the passage that we consider this morning concerning marriage, Paul then transitions to the parent and child relationship, beginning with children. Like we did this morning, we're going to follow his outline and consider children. First of all, there he says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." And so that it's a very simple but an emphatic need, because as we noted this morning, Paul addresses the things that children are that we are going to struggle with the most, husbands, wives, and now children. Children are going to struggle with obeying their parents. But parents have been given the authority by God to be the parents over these children, and children need to heed. And there is that qualifier there in the Lord, that unfortunately there are some bad parents out there, and we would hope that the children would be able to get into situations where they can follow the Lord and not a bad parenting situation. However, as much as is within us, parents striving to rear their children in the Lord, children are to obey their parents in the Lord, and this is right. God has established that in Ephesians 6. We are in Ephesians 6, but in Proverbs 6 now, in verse 20, Solomon says, "My son, keep thy father's commandment and forsake not the law of thy mother." In Proverbs 23 and verse 22, "Hearken unto thy father that begat thee, and despise not thy mother when she is old." And we could read a number of passages in the Proverbs related to the parent-child relationship as we go. And we'll note a few more, but there are many others we could consider. We may consider more in future studies. But he also says, not only obey your parents, but he says, honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, looking back to the 10 commandments that were given by God through Moses and to Moses to give to the people of Israel. He says this was the first of those commandments that was given with a promise along with it. And that promise is that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long on the earth. Now, it's difficult for me to read that and not think about that saying that parents might sometimes say, "I brought you into this world and I can take you out of it," right? Certainly there is honor in obeying parents, but this goes even further than just the childhood. This goes further than when we're reared in the home. This extends even to later in life, when then the children have to begin caring for the parents and returning, if you will, the blessing that the parents have provided for them when they were younger. When we go back to Mark chapter 7, I invite you over there for a moment, where Jesus is going to make reference to the reality of those in his day who were, again, twisting the scriptures, adding to and taking away from the scriptures, following their own traditions and claiming that they were following the law of Moses. And he would reference back to Exodus 20 and verse 12, the very commandment that we've just mentioned, honor thy father and mother. And then you have also Exodus 21, verses 15 and 17, I believe it is, where there is warning given, there's command given that if a child, if a child were to strike his parents, then he is to be put to death. And if a child curses his parents, then he is to be put to death under the law of Moses. Well, in Mark chapter 7, you have the occasion that the Pharisees had found a way to not take care of their elderly parents, who they were charged by God to take care of them. They had made a loophole for themselves, patted themselves on the back. In chapter 7 and verse 9, he said unto them, Full well ye reject the commandment of God, that you may keep your own tradition. For Moses said, Honor thy father and thy mother, and whoso curseth father or mother, let him die the death. But ye say, If a man shall say to his father or mother, It is Corban, that is to say, a gift, by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, he shall be free. So whatever I was going to use, the funds, the ability that I was going to use to help you, mom or dad, I'm going to give it to God. I'm going to call it a gift. I'm going to call it Corban. And so I really don't have the means to take care of you any longer. I'm going to give that to God. I imagine in their manipulation of the law, they're probably manipulating the amount that they would also be giving and not giving to their parents as well. He says, verse 12, And you suffer him no more to do aught for his father or his mother. You don't require him anymore to take care of them, making the word of God of none effect through your tradition, which you have delivered, and many such like things ye do. And so, just as serious of a charge that it is for children to obey their parents, and when you consider Romans chapter 1, the list of sins that Paul would give there in Romans chapter 1, among those so serious sins like murder and sexual immorality and other things, fornication that he has listed there, he has disobedient to parents. Just as serious as the charge of being obedient to parents is to take care of our parents as we get older, as children grow, to be able to take care of them, and the parents get to the point where they cannot care for themselves. In fact, 1 Timothy 5 and verse 8 is in reference to this very context. Specifically, he's referencing the widows who were among them. As Timothy would go about his ministry, he says that the first priority to care for these widows should be their families. He says, if any provide not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. Now, oftentimes that verse is removed from its context a little bit, and there is principle that even parents are to take care of their children in that sense, but the verse is not talking about that. It's talking about grown children taking care of, family members taking care of their elderly family members who need help and cannot care for themselves. So he says, Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee and thou mayest live long on the earth. You know, obedience and honor toward parents is going to provide a foundation for any human being to have a correct view of authority, to have a correct view of God, to have a correct view of how to be a good citizen. And all of those things are going to be blessings in our lives. But then we also find parents. In Ephesians 6 and verse 1, first he says children, then second he says parents. But when we get down to verse 4, he specifically references fathers. So the charge here is directly to fathers who are to lead in the home in as parents. And so certainly the mother is very instrumental in carrying out what is charged and commanded here in verse 4. But as we noted earlier in Ephesians 5 and verses 22 and following, he addresses wives with something that they would struggle with most. He addresses husbands with something that they would struggle with most. Now he's addressed children with something that they would struggle with most. And now he's addressing fathers with something that they would struggle with most, because many fathers might have the mindset that, well, the mother's going to take care, the mother's going to do all the parenting. And that certainly is not what God has in mind. You fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. What might provoke them to wrath? I suppose we could suggest a number of things, but one of the primary things that I've learned, I believe, that perhaps not being there for them is something, because you read the statistics of homes that don't have a father present in the homes, and the statistics of how much uh, dysfunction comes from a home in that regard. And I've seen many times individuals that I've known who may have had a father in the home, but he was not a strong father. He was not leading as a father as he ought, and that individual has a problem with authority, and that individual has uh, other types of problems sometimes in their lives. And so Paul charges fathers, take the lead in not provoking your children to wrath. Take the lead in bringing them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, training, hands-on training, and teaching, and admonition, which means disciplining. Don't leave that all to the mother. We're going to consider some of the things that mothers are to consider as well, that Paul would write to Titus here in just a moment. But he says, don't forget the discipline. Before we go to Titus, in Proverbs 13 and verse 24, he that spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chasteneth him betimes. Unfortunately, the world has painted this picture that if we discipline our children, it's abuse. There is a situation where we could take discipline to the point of abuse, and we ought not go there. But disciplining our children as God would have us to discipline them is not abuse. And we have to stand against the world who would consider it that way. In Proverbs 22 and verse 6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And so in Titus chapter 2, in verse 4 there, it's in the context, Paul is writing to Titus and telling Titus, and he's addressing different groups, older men, older women, younger men. And here it's in the context of what the older women should be teaching the younger women, that they should teach them, that they may teach the young women to be sober, self-controlled, not only self-controlled, but have their mind about them to be able to reason, um, to love their husbands. Interestingly, the love there, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is not the agape. It may be the phileo, because there's going to be times that she's not going to like her husband. And to love her children, this I believe may be the same word, and to be discreet, controlling herself, chaste. Unfortunately, the world wants to change the spelling of that word. They want to change and tell women to be chaste, CHASED, and be chaste by men, and that's not the way that God would have us to be, but to be chaste, pure, to be whole, keepers at home. That certainly, perhaps one of the greatest distresses upon the home is when we have sent more and more into the workforce, even our wives having to go into the workforce and the demands that are put there. However, primarily it's the case that she not neglect her home. Brother Elkins would say that she is the queen of the house, that she makes sure she takes care of her home no matter what befalls the family. Good, that she be good, that she be obedient or subjective to her own husbands, which we considered this morning, that the word of God be not blasphemed. And so let us, as parents, remember, with fathers taking the charge, and certainly mothers are extremely instrumental in the parenting and the bringing up of children. Provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And in Psalm 127 and verse 3, let us remember, because oftentimes we're going to feel that our children might be a burden, and we need to remember that they are a blessing. In Psalm 127 and verse 3, lo, children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. Which brings us to the Lord, who needs to be the foundation of our home if the Lord is not the foundation of our home, well then yes, children will be a burden, and we will be a burden to them, and there will not be the blessings that we could have. Going back to Psalm 127 now, and I invite you to go over there with me, and then we'll turn over to Deuteronomy 6 together. In Psalm 127, beginning with verse 1, we'll read this short psalm. Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat bread of sorrows, for so he giveth his beloved sleep. And so all of this work, all of this energy that you expel to take care of your family is vain if you're not building your house upon the Lord and his word. Lo, children are an heritage, a gift of the Lord, inheritance, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. A mighty man who is trained and skilled with the bow and arrow in archery is going to direct that arrow where it needs to go with the energy that it needs so that it meets the target that is intended. And that is the picture that is given to us as parents with how we are to direct our children. That with precision and that guidance and direction that we point them in the way. And here's the hard part. At some point you got to let go of the arrow and let it go to the target. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate. And let us be reminded of what God would say through Moses to the children of Israel, principles that are needful even today as we continue to strive to rear our children in the Lord. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, beginning with verse 4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, with all thy soul, with all thy might. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart. And thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thine hand, and they shall be as frontlets between thine eyes. And thou shalt write them upon the posts of thy house and on thy gates. And so, continually, we need to talk of the Lord. Continually, we need to point them to the word of the Lord. Continually, we need to teach them how to talk to the Lord or to our Father through Jesus Christ. Continually, we need to show them how to lean on the Lord in every aspect of our lives, so that when we let go of the arrow, it goes directly to the target as it's intended. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long on the earth. And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. What a blessing it is that we have the models, the standard that God has given us, whereby we can follow, and the instructions that we can follow and continue to go back to be reminded of who we should be as children, who we should be as parents, and to build our homes upon the Lord. So as we strive for Christ-centered homes, let's continue to be reminded of these, make application of these. But maybe it's the case this afternoon that you've not done so. Maybe you're not in the Lord's house. Maybe you're not in the church, and you need to put on Christ in baptism, believing who he is, repenting of your former life sin, confessing your faith in him, and then being baptized for the forgiveness of your sins. And maybe you've done those things, but you've not been faithful to him. You've not been faithful as a child of God. You've not been faithful as a parent rearing your children in the home. You've not been faithful to the Lord. You need to come back to him. Won't you come?